we all know that you have experience on print book and ebooks already. So we're just wondering that as an author, how do you see these two differing from each other? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's just two different mediums to get the story to the reader, and it really depends on how the reader prefers to enjoy their books. What I love about ebooks is that people can get direct access. There are a lot of people in the U.S. that live outside of big cities where they don't have bookstores nearby, and you can finish a book and find another book by that same author and press a button, and it's delivered to you immediately. One thing I've been surprised by is the number of readers who will support both formats. That some books they want in print and others they want to read on their e-reader. And sometimes they'll buy both of the same book if they really like it. I think it's important for us to keep the prices of ebooks low so that people will support both editions.
So do you think the two medium or the rules, the books is kind of different from the customer's perspective?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the type of book. For myself, I read nonfiction, and I prefer that in a book format because I might want to check things in the index and flip back and forth to another chapter or look at the pictures in the middle of the nonfiction book. With fiction, you tend to read from beginning to end without skipping around, and you don't read fiction over and over again like you might with a reference book. So fiction works better for ebooks. You read it once and you don't have it on your shelf. You know, it stays on your device, or you can lend it to someone else on their e-reader. So there's just more options. Audiobooks are a big format for me, and that's something, you know, my wife does most of her reading now with audiobooks. So I think we have to not look at them as competing formats, but just different ways of getting stories to readers.
So last time you mentioned that the influence of the internet has had the book industry. So what about ebooks? How do you think ebooks influence to the book industry?
Well, I think they're going to keep spreading in certain areas. I think fiction, especially genre fiction, will we might see ebooks become 70 or 80% in the U.S. of that particular segment's sales. I think, you know, I worked in a university setting for years in the trade bookstore of a university, and I always felt like textbooks needed to figure out how to get on computers and iPads and be user-friendly, because the amount of money that kids are having to spend on their textbooks is just too much. So it'll come in stages, and we'll figure out each type of book individually. There won't be one answer, I don't think, for all books.
So do you think, what kind of effect will ebooks have to our reading habits and the relationship between readers and the authors?
Well, for our habits, people, there's done lots of studies, and Amazon has released reports that people who own an e-reading device, their reading levels shoot up. They read 4 times as many books. Part of that is there's no downtime. When you finish a book, you don't have to wait until the next time you go to a bookstore. And when you go to the bookstore, maybe you want to start a new series, but they don't have the first book of that series, but they have everything else. So you have to order a book. And now you're waiting a week for the book to come in, and that's a week that you're not reading. And even the lost hours, you know, I know people who finish a book at 10 o'clock at night, and they want to start the next book in the series, and you press a button, and you might read a few chapters in that next book before you go to bed. So people are maximizing the amount of hours they spend reading. Also with that device, it's in your purse or in your briefcase, and you have thousands of books available. And so since it's always with you, if you have some downtime, you can just pick it up and do a little reading. You know, when I look at my big hardbacks, like I travel and get on an airplane, I leave my big heavy books at home and I take my e-reader and get a lot more reading that way.
In the last 5 or 10 years, is there any picture in your mind about what's going on in the last 5 or 10 years for the book industry?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of the same changes that have happened. I think it's going to continue. I think the big thing for for publishers is the worldwide adoption, I think, of e-readers. I think this is something that will catch on. And it's amazing that I can publish a book in the US and it goes on sale all over the world immediately. And I get readers from so many countries. And as they buy more e-readers and realize that they have access to just such an incredible supply of books immediately, no matter where they live in the world, I think that's going to be a big change. When countries like China and India and Brazil fall in love with ebooks, it's going to be good for all of literature. I think the devices will get better. I think one thing we need is like a waterproof e-reader so we can read in the bathtub and not worry about dropping it and take it to the beach. And we have waterproof phones, so the technology is very easy. We need to make that happen. I think an e-reader that folded open, so you have opposing pages, and when you swipe, you could see the page curl. It really was so fast, the screen, that it responded to your finger. So, when you move the page, you can see the words underneath it as you move it. You can watch it flap over to the other side. I think if we built a device like that was closer to a real book, then a lot of people who were resisting reading, would find that this thing that closed up so the screens were protected was waterproof. Maybe the screen has a little texture on it so it feels like paper. The devices we have now are just really crude and very new. It's only been a handful of years that we've had these e-ink screens. So I imagine in 5 years we'll have a device that's so affordable and so rugged and so beautiful that more people will be reading on those instead of buying print books.
Because as I know that some of the traditional publishers, they think of this two part of book is kind of competing with each other.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, do you think you probably don't agree with them?
No, I don't. I look at what the movie industry went through. That for a long time they tried to fight the digital editions of books. And now when you buy a Blu-ray, it'll come with the DVD as well, and also a digital download. So you get all these formats for one price. And I think the same should be true of books. If you buy a print book, you should get the ebook as a free download. And there are a lot of advantages to ebooks, not just in how they're delivered for the reader, but from the publisher. They don't have to guess at the number of books to print. It's better for the environment. The electrons are free. So I just think it's very new, and we hate change and trying to figure out how the industry is going to handle this. But it's happened with the music industry, where now most of our music is just downloaded off the internet. We don't have CDs and cassettes and albums like we used to. So it's happening to movies and TV, where we stream TV instead of watching it live. It's just the internet is changing all these different forms of entertainment, and books are now trying to figure out where they're going to fit into that.
So you keep mentioning about the competition. So what's the real competitor of books or reading?
It's everything that's not reading. So it's TV and movies, sports. Things that are good. You can't hate these things. You can't say like, I don't want people to go to the beach or go on a hike. I want them to do those things, but I want them, if they have to spend money on some form of entertainment, as a writer, I want them to choose books. And as someone who's a reader and loves literature, I want more people to choose to read. So a lot of my ideas aren't things that just come from being a writer. It comes from wanting other people to share in my passion. When I read a good book, I want to meet other people who've read it so we can talk about it. And I also want more great books to exist. And as reading contracts, as people do less of it, there'll be less money for publishers to sign new authors, and there'll be less books for me to choose from.
So from this perspective, we should see ebooks as a new weapon that we can access more readers instead of a new competitor.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think publishers could use the ebook to see if there's interest in a print edition. So since there's less cost, you have, the editing, the cover art. There are some costs to producing an ebook. They're not free, but once you've produced that file, you can generate an infinite supply of them with no cost. You don't have to do a second print run. So what I would love to see are more authors get a chance to start their careers by doing just ebooks only. And if that ebook sells enough copies, then do a print edition and see it as a way of nurturing new writers and helping them develop their craft.
So you just mentioned about the pricing of your book. Can you elaborate more on that? Why you want to make your ebooks pricing kind of lower than average?
Well, I think when ebooks came out, publishers really didn't know what to do with them. And so they priced them to keep people from buying them, really. I think they priced them really high so that people would still buy the print editions. So in the US, a hardback might be $25 US. They were pricing the ebook at like $15, and the paperback would be less expensive than the ebook. And there's still some ebooks out there that are more expensive than the paperback. And the paperback costs money to print and to ship, and it doesn't make sense from the consumer's perspective. So I like to keep my ebook prices cheaper than the mass market paperback that I grew up with, the books that we used to have in our back pockets. And that just seems fair to me. And I would rather have a lot of readers at a lower price than try to maximize how much money I'm making on fewer sales. You look at the App Store and the success of games like Angry Birds. For 99 cents, it seems like they're giving away the game, but they sell millions of copies and make millions of fans, and that's a better business model.
So your goal is to kind of maximize your readers.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I've written a lot of books, so if people enjoy my writing, there's 10 other books they can check out, and they're all affordable. When they see the price, they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to read everything this guy has written," instead of spending $12 for a big publisher's book.
So what about giveaways? Because a lot of authors also use giveaway to kind of as a promotion tools of their books. How do you think of that?
I love it. My first Wool story, which was the story that helped me quit my day job and that started my career, it's free online. And one of the things I like about it is readers can sample your work and decide if they want to invest in the rest. If someone doesn't like that first book, I don't want them, spending money or reading more. And one of the things that means is that you don't have a lot of dissatisfied readers. You don't have people who invest a lot of money and a lot of time and realize they don't like it. It means the only people who read all of your stuff are the people who have tried that free sample. So you end up with happier readers, which is a great thing. And again, I think the challenge is getting people's time. Reading is a big investment. So worrying about the money is, going back to the piracy thing, with music and films, someone can steal a movie and watch it in 2 hours and they're done. They're not going to go and watch every movie that directors made. There's no connection to the actors. With books, it might take you, 8 or 12 hours that you're investing in this product. And when you're done, and if you spent that much time, you enjoyed it, you want to go read everything else that this writer has written. So I think the dynamics and the psychology are much different for books. And we need to think about why that is instead of just treating books as if they're songs or films. It's a completely different animal.
So you also mentioned about the DRM. So would you please tell us your ideas toward DRM? Because this is kind of very tricky because publishers like DRM a lot because they hate piracy.
Yeah.
But from your viewpoints, I see different ideas about this part. So,
yeah. So, in case readers don't know, DRM is the encryption, the lock they put on ebooks, so they can't be copied and they can't be moved from device to device. And I just think it's too much restriction. When I buy a book, I can lend it to a friend. I can sell it to a used bookstore. I can read it wherever I go. And with an ebook, and you buy a new device, you upgrade, from a Kobo to a Sony, you want to be able to take all your books with you. And I think we worry too much about people stealing our books. I worry about obscurity. I worry about no one reading my books. And I remember I used to go on the piracy sites and search for my books. This was years ago. And it would say like no results. Like no one was stealing my books. This was terrifying for me because it meant that there was no demand for my works. So I would get sad. And I remember the first time someone emailed me and said, hey, they're pirating your book over here. I was like, yes, that's awesome. And I would go over there and they would discuss the book and there'd be comments. And I would log in and say like, it's so cool that you guys are checking out my book. And no one believed me that this was the author discussing this. But I've been very, I have a button on my website for anyone who's stolen the book and enjoys it. If they want to send me some money, they can, but they don't have to. And every week, people with PayPal, just this morning, I got a notification that someone sent me $10 for wool. That's twice what it cost. So they're showing that they really enjoyed it, and they send me a little note apologizing. But it'd be like worrying that someone went into a friend's house and saw my book on their shelf and said, do you mind if I read this? That's not stealing from me. That's me gaining a reader. Mm-hmm. And I think publishers should treat their paying customers with respect by giving them freedoms and not worry about what's going on with piracy. I don't think the guy who runs the Game of Thrones TV show, he came out and said that piracy has helped that show become the #1 show in the world. And that got a lot of attention when he said that. But I think he's right. I mean, you want people talking about your material, and you're not going to stop it, so don't fight it.